a story on sustainability. We'll talk today about me having done 10 years of research on sustainability design. And you're welcome to look at the CV at some point. Within those 10 years on sustainability design, I've learned a little bit about the tales of what misconceptions we have around sustainability, about truths, where are we already getting some things right, and then what transitions could look like from here, the way forward into the future. And I got two disclaimers for that. The first one is, I'm probably going to say a few things that you don't like. And the second one is, I won't give you tools for software architecture, because I come more from a direction of requirements engineering. And hopefully you will still find it applicable. And hopefully you will agree at the end of it that maybe it's even good that I made you a bit uncomfortable in between. So, first one, what I hear a lot, or what I used to hear a lot when I asked my students or some of the practitioners I met on how they think about including sustainability into the software they produce, they said, I just do what my customer asks. And I don't think that's true. It's kind of a translation to I am not responsible. So when I hear that from my students in class, I start poking a little bit to the point where people get uncomfortable. And I mean poking in the sense of, but what if you discovered that the software that you do is not quite ethical, or does something that is definitely not sustainable? And then everybody gets wiggly. And I don't have a clear answer for these things. What I want everybody to take away from that thought is, oh, maybe we do carry a responsibility for some of the sustainability impacts that we create by the software systems that we design. Luckily, after I preached that for a few years, somebody who's well better known than me stepped up to say that. Grady Booch said, every line of code represents a moral and ethical implication. And what he meant by that is we embed the values into the systems that we design. And therefore, since we create those systems and put our values in there, we also do have a responsibility for the systems that we put out there. And there is more to it than green IT. So the next question could be, well, Birgit, what do you actually mean when you talk about sustainability impacts? So, sidebar in this talk, what are sustainability impacts? 10 years ago, I thought I should ask the people who've been doing this for a long time. And one of their names was Lorenz Hilti. He's a professor in Zurich, and his colleague Bernd Abischer. They came out with this figure that was detailing the environmental impacts of software, of ICT actually, so a little bit wider. And they looked at it both as part of the problem and as part of the solution. So as part of the problem, we have life cycle effects of ICT. We are extracting resources. We have a lot of problems with e-waste. When we look at the enabling effects, what does a software system enable us to do? Then we can see, oh, we have some induction effects. That's a good thing. So people may start using a service instead of buying a physical product. We also have obsolescence effects. That dark drawer that you have somewhere at the bottom of your office that has all the old devices that we can't use anymore. That is some of the obsolescence effects, because now you needed the new version for it. It's not necessarily because the device broke. And then on the positive side, we have some of the substitution effects as well as optimization. On the third level, the systemic effects. On the negative side, we see the rebound effects and some emerging risks. So rebound effects, we used to have one device per institution. Now, most of us have at least two devices. I think I'm still minimalistic with two devices. I own one laptop and one phone. For many of us, it's more than that. And on the positive side, we see maybe we can transition towards more sustainable patterns of consumption. That's only a sliver. That's the environmental impacts. That's the first part of it. There are some people who say, really, this is all what sustainability is about. I talked with a Earth System and Sciences professor a few weeks ago in Gothenburg who said, really, like, that's it. Everybody else, what some people consider sustainability is, here's a beautiful new world. I would still like to draw a wider picture, because Some frameworks like the Sustainable Development Goals also say, let's look at the social aspects. So no, environmental is not everything. Let's look at the example of a platform that rents out short-term housing. Was initially a great idea. City is out of hotel rooms because I wanted to go to a conference and everybody wants to go to the conference. So maybe I can rent somebody's apartment instead who's going on vacation. Good. That person gets a little bit of additional income. I have local accommodation. That's fun. So far, so good. But there are a couple of things that we didn't see coming, which is housing markets have gotten really tight because when people buy an additional apartment to rent it out short term, then that unit of housing essentially gets removed from the rental market for the people who live locally. If that happens a lot, that means rents are going to go up. And that leads to more gentrification, especially in the areas that already had trouble with that before. And I didn't come up with that. If you want to read the details, it's published by Wachsmuth and Weisler. Within this talk, it serves as a motivation for, there is also economic and social impacts caused by software systems. Anything else? Yes, because I'm asking. So when we look at the technology that we use every single day, from the maybe electric toothbrush that we're running in the morning to a vehicle that we drive, or how we get around, or how our work gets facilitated, have you noticed any side effects of that? Attention span, making sense of the world, fake news, all that uncomfortable stuff. Politics getting skewed, a lot of propaganda out there. We have trouble in some of our social relationships. We have some developmental delays. Yes, we have digital natives. It comes at a cost. So there are some positive and some not so positive impacts. And that research was done by the Center for Humane Technology, not too far from here, by the people who brought the social dilemma to us. Now that we know what these impacts could be, let's get back to the sustainability design part. In 2014, I sat together with a number of colleagues and wrote a manifesto. It's published 2015. It took us a while to get the wording right. And it lays out a few of the misconceptions that we had about sustainability, where we say, wait, this is a thing that is interdisciplinary. We need to collaborate across several disciplines. It's a long-term thing. It's not, quote unquote, something that's fixable on short notice. And you can still find that manifesto online under sustainabilitydesign.org. And we're going to look into a couple of the things that we said back then about, especially about, it's not a problem that can be solved in the sense that we engineers love to think about solving problems. And we'll look into why that is. If you want to hear more about the Karlskrona Manifesto, then I've linked a YouTube talk for you, because it's not today's talk. Instead, we're going to move forward. What happened after that? Practitioners came to us and they said, this is great. Now, how do I do that? Like, how do I take the principles that describe in this manifesto and make that happen in my daily practice? And we said, oh, that's a good question. We didn't think about that. Back to the drawing board. And then we started thinking about what could a framework look like? What could a method look like? What could a tool look like? A set of checklists that would help people find the sustainability effects. And that's how we developed the Sustainability Awareness Framework. In short, SUSAF. It looks at those 5 dimensions that we just covered, and it has several sets of questions, a set of questions for every one of the dimensions, walking people through what could you possibly want to think about when you talk about social sustainability for the software system that you're currently developing. So one of those questions in social could be, what is trust going to look like for you and your users? How are the users going to trust each other? How are the users going to trust the developing company? And so on. And then we have a process that would walk people through a workshop of how to do that. And the workshop can take anywhere between 90 minutes and 4 hours, depending on into how much detail one wants to go with the discussions with the developers and other stakeholders. This one is available online because it's also not today's talk. It's a very useful tool, and we have a workbook where you can follow the process that we guide this workshop with. But Birgit, does it work? Before we move on, yes, it does. Down here is a QR code that links to the workbook for the Sustainability Awareness Framework. And on the left, you see the people who worked with me on that piece. And we've been developing it over the course of 5 years. We've also done this with a number of companies. We've done that with 7 universities in higher education, both in the US and in Canada and in Europe. And we've had practitioners in several European countries and in India and in the US work and try it out with us. We also developed an online version because we worked mostly online between 2020 and 2022. So it was a good thing to also be able to do that workshop online, and we used the Miro board to do that. And like I said, it's not today's talk. Do check the QR code if you find it interesting, and happy to answer questions about it. So what is today's talk then? Well, Birgit, if you've all solved all of this, why isn't everyone doing this? Why do we still have challenges? Who of us is old enough to remember when we didn't have to drive with a seatbelt on? At some point, we realized there's a lot of injuries that happen in car crashes. Maybe if we invent safety belts, we can reduce that. At some point, we realized that when stuff burns down, maybe there are some precautionary measures that we can take and some safety rules so to ban the hazards. And maybe once we figured out how to do that for sustainability, things can become better. So in these areas, safety and security, we had a couple of mishappenings until we said, okay, let's do something about it and let's improve the situation. The challenge with sustainability is we still have things like planned obsolescence and let's make money as opponents that would sometimes fail to take into account environmental costs that incur when we develop certain software systems and the hardware that goes along with it, because I yet have to see the software system that doesn't run on hardware. At this point, I could get a little bit sad, thinking, oh, we're kind of doomed. But then again, we also know that there's always a way to change the status quo, independent of whether it fits the current paradigm or not. What can change the world is a set of thoughtful, committed citizens. And so on the next slide, I want to introduce you to a few people who are part of these thoughtful, committed citizens. Starting with sustainability and software architecture. So one of the first systematic reviews that was out on sustainability and software engineering was by Heiko Koziolek in 2011. And then there were a couple of systematic mapping studies by Andrikopoulos, and then the sustainability assessment framework, which is somewhat similar in the idea to the sustainability awareness framework that we created from a requirements engineering perspective. And Patricia Lago and her colleagues went more from a software architecture perspective. So they both complement each other pretty well. And then Penson Stadler et al., we did a couple of systematic reviews from a requirements engineering point of view and across all software engineering. And then with Colin Venters, I've done a couple of years of looking into, well, what have we learned in the past 5 years on research and practice in sustainability and software engineering? So this is a paper we published at the beginning of the year. And it looked into where were we in 2018 when we published the last article? Where did we come to by 2023? And where do we think the future challenges and developments are lying? And we saw, well, in 2018, it had emerged as a topic. We were more focused on technical and environmental factors and some reference architectures. Then by today, we have some research on different dimensions, and we also have started integrating it into teaching. And then by 2030, we hope to establish some KPIs and have better reference models. We've also noticed that we still have difficulties to establish social and individual metrics. So what do we do with that? Well, here enters my second line of research. How are the software developers doing? Well, the stick figure on the right is certainly a bit overwhelmed with a number of tasks. And especially in California, people wear their busy badges with a lot of pride. They're really important. And The social scientist Brené Brown likes to say that as long as we wear our busyness as a badge of honor, maybe we're going to have a hard time being less stressed. So it is also somewhat of a self-reinforcing work culture. And in addition to that, we've had a bit of a mental health challenge going on, induced by the pandemic. We've had a lot of change in the way how we do work. We've had online fatigue, people jumping from one online meeting to the next and then burning out from that, because all of a sudden we didn't walk from there to there anymore. We didn't even have to get out of our seats. Not so great for a human body. So how are you doing right now? Maybe I need to remember you that you not only have a head, but also something below, because we are really good at turning into heads on a stick when we sit too long in front of a presentation or our own computer. So I want to invite you to sit a little bit taller and maybe move a little bit while I carry on with this. It's a really good thing. Birgit, this is still software engineering. Why are you telling us this? Well, two out of 5 of us burn out at some point in our career, or at least have a high risk of burnout. That ain't so great. This was a study that did not come out of academia, but was done by Yerbo. The reason why it's still on the slides is they had 30,000 survey responses, and I thought that was a pretty good data set. So I'm quoting their study nevertheless. And what does it have to do with software engineering? Well, I do not take my best decisions under stress. I don't make my best designs under stress. And well-being and resilience are precursors for developing software for sustainability. If we remember that Grady Beach quote, and that we design our values into the systems we create, then maybe it's good that we take care of our own well-being and resilience a bit as software engineers in order to introduce something good to the world. Maybe. I thought I'd try it out. So I designed a series of studies where we looked into mindful attention awareness and personal well-being of software developers and computer workers. I had them rate their perceived productivity and self-efficacy, and we did weekly interventions with them using breath work. When I talk to IT people and well-being, I tend to use a little bit more biohacking vocabulary than when I talk to a traditional yoga audience, because I'm also a yoga teacher on the side, and it's basically two sides of the same coin. It is about, okay, we have a physical body, we have a rational mind, and we have emotions. How do we bring that in harmony, and how do we make sure that we can act in integrity and take good care of ourselves? We found that practicing this regularly has definitely increased well-being and self-efficacy. We found some inconclusive data on the perceived productivity, which may definitely be colored by the ongoing pandemic at the time. We did 3 replications of that, and we found it really interesting that there was a dip in the mindful attention awareness because people first started to realize how much they were not paying attention once we asked them about that. And at the corner in the bottom right, you see the people who were doing the research with me. So we looked a little bit into that piece, and that's also not today's talk. So we did think about the software developers, and here's a good chance to take another really deep breath. Did you know what a sigh does for you? I want to invite you to do that along with me. So feel into how you're feeling right now. This is the woo-woo part of the talk, and I own it. So bear with me. Humor me for 30 seconds. So I want you to lean back in your seat, take a really big inhale, and then let it go with a sigh. Again, I didn't hear anything. Almost there. Do another one. Big, deep inhale, and then an audible sigh. This is important. I'll tell you why. Okay. Feel any difference?
I'm woozy.
Woozy. Yes. Yes. So it actually the audible sigh triggers your autonomous nervous system, your vagus nerve. It stimulates the vagus nerve. This is a signal to the body that it is safe to relax in this environment. Now, maybe you have a mental mental contrasting one going on. No, 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 no. I'm sitting in front of my supervisor, cannot relax. So no, just kidding. So this audible sigh is a signal to relax the body, that it's safe to relax the body. And it is something that we've learned to suppress because somebody in our childhood may have said that it's impolite. Same with yawns. We get taught to know, cover the yawn or swallow the yawn or do not yawn. It's actually really healthy to yawn. So if you feel the need to yawn during the talk, please do so. From that little sidestep onto well-being, what does it tell us about the sustainable software engineering piece and where we want to go next? Maybe it's not all about the technical route. Maybe we're asking the wrong questions. And I've worked together a lot with a guy who likes asking uncomfortable questions. So let's look into how we usually do software engineering research. We get taught in our basic methodology course, Research 101, we identify a problem, a research question, and then we propose a solution. Do we actually know that that is the best way to help? I don't know. It's what we do in engineering. In the Devil's Dictionary of Computing, it reads, problem, noun, something that can be fixed or solved. And this is out of the book Insolvent, written by Christoph Becker, the gentleman who likes to ask the uncomfortable questions. And this is what I want to talk about for the next few minutes, what gets us into trouble when we talk about sustainability. And that was the piece that I highlighted within the Karlskrona Manifesto, that notion that sustainability can be solved, that it's a problem that can be fixed. So what we have characterized as common sustainability pitfalls, from problem, we went to wicked problem. But even the wicked problem is still kind of in a let's fix things mode. And we're scratching our nails. We say, but isn't that what we're supposed to do as engineers? We're supposed to fix things. Yes, and the problem is, or the challenge is, that sometimes we don't see the harmful side effects of that, or we don't see the things we don't know yet, because we have learned really well to use computational thinking, which is a great tool, super useful. So we like to decompose things, divide and conquer, develop solutions for the parts. We like to abstract. So we abstract from a problem to make it easier to think through and then deal with the details. We like to think in patterns. And then we don't want to reinvent the wheel, so we're going to reuse patterns that have been helpful in the past. And we like to design algorithms, ways of how we can do something in a process that can also be reused and that can automate things and make it better, hopefully. It's a great tool. It truly is. And one thing that my supervisor, Manfred Breuer, liked to say was, the trouble is, when you have a really good hammer, everything starts looking like a nail. And it seems to be a little bit what we tend to do in software engineering as well. Now, the medicine, when everything starts looking like a nail, is to introduce a bit more systems thinking. So systems thinking is the idea of, it's not all discrete. We can't always abstract from the details. There's a lot of side effects. There's a lot of interactions and system dynamic flows that maybe we need to look at in a slightly different way. And one of the first people to bring that into software engineering was Steve Easterbrook in his paper From Computational Thinking to Systems Thinking that he published at ICT4S in 2014. So over the past 10 years, we've been playing around with, can we get our students to do a bit more systems thinking? Can we teach them about basic systems thinking to see how this balances out with the computational thinking? Because otherwise we all become these super efficient engineers, and maybe we don't see all of the world around the system that we need to integrate it with. So systems thinking, good. What does systems thinking teach us? It's a complementary perspective. It encourages the students to think wider. It enables practitioners to embrace what else might be there. And I found this nice overview figure which is not exactly an educational tool for systems thinking. It's more of a couple of the general ideas that are stuck in it, because I can't do a full tutorial on it within the time we have. The idea is we get to understand what is laying beyond the surface of that little iceberg that we see. So on top, we see the events that happened. What we often don't see, and what we often might need a social scientist for, is to understand the patterns of behavior that caused the events. And then underlying that, we may need to understand the structure of the system and the way, for example, how our universities are organized in very siloed ways. Even though we all want to do interdisciplinary work and we know that it matters, it's not always made easy by the underlying structures. And then under these underlying structures, we have some mental models that may or may not be a bit outdated. So that means if we include systems thinking, we're done, right? Good. Yeah, the thing is, if it's based on old mental models, maybe not quite yet. And here's where I want to go back to the rebound effect for a second, because we like to think that efficiency is a good thing, to save energy. And efficiency is a good thing in many ways. It has also led us into a couple of pitfalls. And this is most commonly known in form of the rebound effect that was described in the Jevons paradox. The Jevons paradox has been around since 1867, when we learned how to burn coal more efficiently. That's great. So now we're going to use less coal because we can burn it more efficiently, right? To create the same amount of energy. We observed the opposite. The we of Jevons and me back in 1867, we observed that actually coal use went up because energy prices went down as they learned to burn it more efficiently. So that was the first rebound effect. And that's something we still see ongoing today. Our devices get smaller and faster, so let's have more of them. We don't use them less. Okay, so if we overhaul those mental models, then we're done, right? Yeah, if we can catch all those beliefs in operation. And there's a couple more, because they all fed into the structures of the systems that we created. Another one is, yeah, technology has brought us very far. Well, some of us, if we belong to the standard human category, because there is a certain subset of us that can do development, that are in a privileged position to do so. We often have biased data sets. We tend to design for the wealthy because these are the people that are going to buy the products. And there's still a lot of colonialism out there. Colonial. What do you mean colonialism? What is that even? Well, it's a leftover of the globalization in the sense that before we had colonialism, as in we're going to take over this country and use its resources, and now we still kind of do that, except we do it a bit more covert. We do it a bit more hidden. So we see that in the internet. Number one language is English. That's not the number one spoken language around the planet. It is something that, to some extent, we agreed upon to be easier, to make it easier to exchange thoughts and ideas. And to some extent, that is because those are a few of the major companies that pay for a lot of the infrastructure, or paid for a lot of the development of the infrastructure. What else? I've learned that there is this really useful thing called a positionality statement. So in order to combat things like this, like, I'm not going to fix neocolonialism. No, I'm a single person. So what's the thing that I can do? Because I want you to walk away with something graspable from this talk. One thing that I found for myself is a positionality statement. And that is a concept that comes out of feminist theory and explains how a person's perspective is situated within society and how that affects their worldviews, and provides more clarity on the perspective from which that knowledge comes. And it is something that gets used a lot in some disciplines. And in the words of one of the scholars that uses this practice a lot and that works in feminist theory, is, for feminist decolonial scholars, our positionality is the embodied pivot from which our knowledge making materializes. That's a lot of big words, I know. But one thing I wanted to clarify was feminist, because in parts it has gotten a bad rep. It means to advocate that all genders have equal amount of rights, nothing more than that. There are some versions that take it beyond that, what the word itself is defined as and what it means, and the way how I use it in this talk is, it means people should be treated equal. End of the story. So from a perspective of people should be treated equal, how does that translate to IT, and why does this matter? We're not doing gender studies here. No, we don't. We're designing technology. So when I now go ahead and design technology, then I can put out a positionality statement and say, me, born 1981, which means I was probably not quite considered a digital native. I'm a white woman of European descent. I have German upbringing and ancestry. I'm somewhat privileged in my education because I was able to go to university without working 3 jobs at the same time. And I am now an associate professor in software engineering, sustainability, and well-being. I've lived on 4 continents. That says something about my exposure to culture. I've visited more. I'm also a yoga teacher. This is a very defining set of few lines that will transport a lot of how I see the world and what influences my research. Yes.
Do you mind if I ask a question?
Go ahead, please.
I'm all sorts of confused about positionality statements
Mm-hmm.
because I'm not sure, what they allow us to. I'm kind of scared of what they may allow people to do with them. For example, if a scientist openly, states all of their perhaps things they're proud of, / maybe biased by, aren't we just telling the community we're not able to be objective, and that, or are we saying this is what I put into my work and I'm proud of it, right?
Yeah.
There is a little bit of a contrast there that I'm not very comfortable with. Is it going to lead to automatic declines of somebody's paper if their positionality statement is at odds with what they're doing? Right? For example, a white male doing diversity research, you would just discard their thoughts on the subject because we know about them. Should we allow this much input into our science from who we are? I don't know.
That's a very good question. Should we allow this much input to science from who we are? It's exactly what Reviewer 2 said. This has no place in a research article. I'm exaggerating. That's not exactly what you said, but it comes to that point. So
yeah, they're convinced.
The point, exactly. The point is, well, research is objective and measurable. Research should be objective and measurable. So what would that do to introduce a positionality statement? Like, does it actually make it more understandable? Or does it say, well, here's my positionality statement, I'm not objective. So my personal stance on that is, it is not completely objective and measurable because we all have ingrained biases. And I agree that a positionality statement should not be used as an excuse to take away any diligence from making research as objective and measurable as we can make it. And it will bring some light to some of the otherwise completely hidden biases. So I see it as a way to say, this is who I am. It's almost like I bring it up in my threats to validity section, like knowing this about myself, here's a threat that I could have introduced within a researcher's subjectivity bias. So that would be the type of threat that I would classify it as. If I do analysis of qualitative data, I have a potential bias due to subjectivity when I interpret qualitative data. And that interpretation may be colored by my personal background. So I think if I see it within that frame of mind, within the threats to validity section, it could be a good thing. And there are some other research areas, for example, human-computer interaction. For them, it's a fairly normal tool. This is also where I saw it first, I think around 2012 in a Kai paper. And I thought about it a lot. So it's very good that you bring up, wait, what could that do? Would that mean that I then am allowed to like have an agenda in this thing? So I like to think about it as explaining a threat to validity to research, to say, this is one more of them. Here are my statistical challenges, and here are my personal interpretation challenges, depending on the type of data that I work with. Thanks for the question.
Thank
Yes.
you.
So I thought we were bringing it up in the context of requirements engineering.
Mm-hmm.
Is the focus here requirements engineering or empirical research or both?
It's both. I think we tend to already do it within requirements engineering to a certain degree, because we have a high awareness of there are stakeholders, and stakeholders have opinions, and they bring them to the table. And I think that it applies all across research, and that in some disciplines we're very aware of that. So for example, a psychologist, because that's what they're trained on, they also examine their own mind and say, okay, wait, do I have any bias that's going to influence my research? And we don't necessarily get trained on that in software engineering. And therefore, I find the positionality statement to be a good tool to make me reflect for myself, independent of whether that goes into a paper or not. It makes me reflect upon, wait, does the fact that I happen to be a yoga teacher make me want to find positive indicators really badly, so that I'm going to cherry pick my evidence when I report on that study? Because that will be a red flag. And if I'm aware of it, then I can say, okay, let me put this data down, walk away from it, and then come back to it. And then also let me talk to my colleague who's really critical of this study that I just did, and let me ask him or her to poke at my results and see what comes of that. So in that sense, it could be a useful tool, because it's not for double-blind peer-reviewed research, because I can't put it in there. Like if you put those words, you know that's me who wrote the paper. Not even in that much detail. It's very easy to find people.
Something like gender mag, generalizing it as a way of doing science.
I was just thinking about that.
Mm-hmm.
But that one offers the role-playing part, where you can actually go beyond there and actually realize the bias.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then redesign things. So gender mag is this thing where you
I'm familiar with it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So for those of you that don't know that I did students, is a way to deal, especially with user interfaces, from different perspectives, with different eyes, and how those people can see those user interfaces. Like if you design everything by yourself and you're a white male, everything will be convenient to you, but maybe not for black females, say, right? That may perceive things differently. So anyway, there's a bunch of proto personas that you can inhabit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and maybe that will be useful for that as well. Yes, good idea to combine those two. Okay, couple more points. We're coming back to this one for a last time. So the structures kind of lead us back to more mental models. And then what happens on that third layer, that layer of behavior? We've had a bit of technology criticism also on that behavioral pattern layer, made explicit by Evgeny Morozov in To Save Everything, Click Here. That book has gotten some criticism as well, and I put it up here because it explains really well some of the downsides of techno-solutionism, of how we think we can solve everything by finding a good way to solve it with technology. I'm still a software engineering professor. If I didn't believe in technology to some degree, I wouldn't be here anymore. And I am also the critical voice that says it's not going to save us. So therefore, how do we find the right balance in not expecting a fix by technology, but still seeing it as some way of supporting us in changing society? So computational thinking has solved a lot of good things, and we can't stop there. So we need to think beyond that in terms of ethics and in terms of civic behavior. And it's not only skeptics like Evgeny, there's also a lot of practitioners in the field who say, hey, I care about technology, I love developing technology, and here are some of the challenges that I see in my work environment, which is the way how we use AI and machine learning at the moment may be a bit too short-sighted. we use a big level of abstraction in machine learning and then maybe get too far away from the people that we actually care about and that we want to improve something for. And one last piece of evidence for that is the AI dilemma. Talk that was recorded not too far from here, half a year ago. Has any of you seen it, either the live or the recording? Okay, so this is from the same people who made the social dilemma, the Center for Humane Technology. Tristan Harris and Asa Raskin gave this talk on March 9th, and it talks about how this new technology raises a new class of responsibility because it's very powerful technology. And it becomes so exponentially faster and better that it's very hard for our brains to even cope with the ideas of how quick it develops. And that in itself is something that we get to wrap our heads around and start thinking bigger, wider, further, I don't know. And the other piece is the stuff that went wrong in the social dilemma that we've been thinking about for years, we haven't solved them. So we still have those same challenges with a lot of what social media has brought to us as a side effect. And now we get that exponentialized. So those two thinking points, I highly recommend watching the talk. Now, this is not a doomsday talk. These are like a few of the things where I say, hey, we in software engineering, we really get to pay attention to that and think about these elements. And what for? Well, for designing that better future that we want to have. And here's another California author, Rob Hopkins, who published a book on what if. So from the what is to what if, he suggested maybe we can ask different questions. So this goes back to one of the points halfway through the slide set. Is there a chance we're asking the wrong questions? Can we maybe ask other questions, different questions? And there was a couple of tools on the way out of this talk that I would love for you to look into. One is an absolutely fabulous collection of sustainability models collected by Samuel Mann in New Zealand. He has 790 different models to visualize sustainability collected on his website. Pick your favorite. Down here is the URL for it. And maybe by now there's a few more models because this has been a few years ago. And one of my favorites is on the right, where you have many different perspectives on sustainability and on how this could be integrated in design, whether it's around acting, around knowing ways of being in our society, or whether it's moving around in nature, in cities and beyond. A second tool that I really like are the tarot cards of technology. The tarot cards of technology are a little deck where you can pull a card from and think about a new stakeholder. Could be from a requirements engineering perspective, or could be from a later perspective. So there are tarot cards like the scandal, the smash hit, the radio star, like you made a previous technology obsolete, or Mother Nature. So if the environment, the natural environment was your client, how would the product change? And a last one is the post-growth toolkit. It's a game that says, okay, if we decide that consumerism is not a societal paradigm that we want to follow anymore, what could happen instead? Because we know since the 70s Limits to Growth book that finite resources are not going to grow forever. So what could alternative futures start looking like? All of that set of tools is available for free for download, and the links are at the bottom of the slides. So in summary, two-trail transition around sustainability. Some of the truths are, we do have neocolonialism in the technology that we develop, and we get to pay attention to that and change it. And we do face an AI dilemma in the sense of it's very powerful and let's be responsible with it. Some of the tales are within those tales of techno-solutionism, and some of the transition could lay in from what is to what if And can we ask a couple of different questions? If you would like to give me some feedback on the talk that you do not want to say out loud, you can follow that QR code. It's also on the next slide, where I have a couple more links for resources and a full list of the contributors to all the work that I've been speaking about.
So, I really like the perspective of especially for reverse engineering. I'm not enough of a scholar of science and scientific history to know how to play this idea of playing in scientific research, like thinking about power structures and how power structures and colonialism would affect science. I don't think qualified to do that, but I think it's really useful in reverse engineering. So are there any case studies that you're aware of where people have looked at, like, what if we redesigned Airbnb from scratch, or if we redesigned Facebook from scratch? From purely requirements perspective, thinking about power structures and power dynamics, how would we do it differently?
I'm not aware of case studies per se. I know that there is a field called socio-technical systems research that looks more into power structures and the combination of that. So what is the societal impact of how we currently develop technology, and what would be alternative futures for that? So the research field is there. I know it's not what we tend to do within this community a lot. And I think it's good to kind of look over the rim of our teacup and see whether that does have implications for our research.
Right. Yeah, I mean, so STS, there is a department of STS here. I've been to some of their talks, but the thing is about them is that I don't feel like they understand requirements engineering the way people who really do requirements engineering understand requirements engineering. So I was just wondering whether there's been some case studies on how to do it, how to do it from this perspective that you're presenting, or widely used applications, and what would have been different if they had been done that. So the big jump back for
I'm not aware of it, and I think it would be really cool to look into it. So maybe I'll find a student who wants to do that for their thesis, and we make a case study. And I think the challenge there is always that if we have it as a student work, then we'd still need the industrial practitioners' input for all the things that the student wouldn't know or wouldn't see. Because there is a whole lot more of expertise that goes into it than the user features that we see on the user side of it. Might be interesting.
Yeah, really. The students have something to ask for it. I just wanted to. I'm just struck with this idea of, how do we? Whenever I buy something sustainable, right? It's crappier than what I have now. The shower thing, the water has less pressure, my car drives slower, doesn't use leather anymore. It's not as supple or whatever. So it seems like the more we commit to sustainable goals, right, we are restricting ourselves in some way. And it's okay if we make that choice ourselves. But what I'm struggling with is the new generations, especially as they're rising out of poverty in China and whatever. And they don't get to enjoy anymore the full life, right, that we were used to, and the promises that they were raised on, and so on. So is it fair, is I guess offering the young people this sustainable future where they have to cut the amount of stuff they enjoy, etc., while we have enjoyed them? So somehow that there's this struggle in me that whatever we offer and name it sustainable will not be as functional. Right? So is there this eternal struggle between, what people expect and what we can give them if we are to make it sustainable, right? Should we adjust our expectations? Should we change culture? In America, we are like ultimate consumers. I can do it better, but I'll get rewarded, right? How do we change the cultural expectation, right?
That is a very good question. Like, how do I change the cultural expectations? I'm
sorry, this is way too general.
No, it is a great philosophical question, and I've discussed it many times because obviously in this area of research, it comes up a lot because we think about, wait a second, I'd still like to do all those things, and I am restraining myself because I know it has a lot of bad environmental impact. Like I can simply start with myself to think through this. And there was a part of me that wants to be egoistic and say, but I want to do all of that. And there's another part of me that says, and I also care about not having that negative environmental impact because I see some of the negative effects that it has in my natural environment. And if I think about the future generations, I can ask myself, well, do I want to deprive them of that? Or wait a second, do I want to pay a bit more respect to Mother Nature and maybe help restore her a bit more so that there is actually a planet that is still livable on? So it very much depends on perspective. And there can be passionate argumentations for either side, and none of them is correct. So the thing is, it's also very feasible to say, let's all go crazy because who knows, maybe nothing ever happens. Or if it gets too much for Mama Nature, it's going to sneeze, and then half of us are going to be off the surface of the planet, and that's going to resolve some of the troubles that we have. And I've thought about all these lines many times. I don't have an answer because we all get to make that choice individually for ourselves. So I know my choice, and I had a very interesting conversation around that at the Behavior, Energy, and Climate Change conference yesterday as well, with every one of us has our individual boundaries of, this is where I'm willing to step back, and this is what I still want for myself as experience of life, or whatever. And I don't think it's going to work, especially not in a culture as individualistic as here, to say, this is the boundary and you all got to agree with that. I have the right boundary. So it's very much a values-driven thing. And then as society, we still get to agree. And yes, this is one of the places with the biggest footprint per person. Yeah, we know that. And I live in a country now that has a much smaller footprint per person, and at the same time, because colder climate, also more expenses in other parts. But does that mean people should not live very far north because the heating is too expensive, or where it's too hot so they use too much AC? We know that there is also limitations in how much carrying capacity the planet has in those ways. So I think it's too complex a set of questions to be able to find a single answer. It is an ongoing conversation where we agree as humanity. And there is a fascinating book out there, a fiction book, and it uses a lot of very diligently researched pieces of thought through solutions. It's called Ministry for the Future.
My guy from here.
Yes. Well, perfect. Here's your local hero. Finished the book a few months ago. Definitely worth a read.